Just a disclaimer. For those who have read my Commando blog article, this is essentially just going to be a longer-winded rehashing of that. I need to get something off my chest. I need to do it before it destroys me, the person I am, and the person I want to be. It's a story about child abuse, my family, and a school system that claimed to care but looked the other way when they were needed the most. A story that starts at the beginning of my self-acceptance and at the end of my self-flagellation. However, the only way my story makes any sense is to give some context on how I grew up. Through my elementary school years, my dad was physically and emotionally abusive to the point that I was stepping into school each day, depressed, oftentimes thinking that I needed someone to kill me because to my dad, I was useless. At one point, my dad made me walk up to my teachers and tell them that I was useless and that I wasn't going to come to school anymore. When I told him I did this, he claimed that I'd lied to him, stripped me naked, and then he beat me. I was a victim of child abuse, and at the time, I hadn't even realized it. Over the years, I watched my dad and my uncles beat my low-functioning autistic brother. I watched as my uncle bashed my brother's head into a plate of food because the Adderall he was taking took away his appetite. I watched him get whipped with the plug and wire of a vacuum and at times the pipe extension of one. I tried to go and talk to them about it, but they would tell me that other kids my age got this same exact treatment. At the time, my mom worked 5 jobs and I felt like she wouldn't understand or care. My dad's family gaslit me into thinking this was the new normal. My parents would divorce later on, and I thought this would be the end of my experience with abuse from my dad. Sadly, things weren't that easy when it came to my own life. Through a story that would take up this entire video, I ended up being taken care of by an ex-Army officer who claimed that they were ex-psychological operations. I would later learn that he was most likely not this, but rather most likely a chaplain and just used this for clout. They used their former status as being ex-military in order to emotionally abuse me. They claimed that I would either grow up being a heroin addict or getting shot by the cops, and that I was a juvenile delinquent. They came to this conclusion because I spent most of my time behind a computer, or worse yet, avoiding others behind the cover of a book. The friends I had that I trusted were online on forums. I liked them. Hell, I cared about them more than I did the friends they tried to put me with in the real world, who would proselytize over how I was going to hell and wasn't following the path of God. My online friends didn't judge me for having a heart condition that had me hospitalized, and I knew they wouldn't judge me for being Asian outside of lighthearted humor. The internet was an escape, and it was one that reminded me that not everything was fucked. His kids would make fun of me for having heart surgery at age 10 and having been previously hospitalized for it. At the time, my mom had been afraid that my heart condition would flare up and kept me from drinking soda. That, to me, was fair. What wasn't was the ex-Army officer's kids harassing me by mesmerizing me with soda, and at first I shrugged them off, but after a month of dealing with them, it was hard to ignore. The turning point for me was when the ex-Army officer's brother feigned giving me a hug. He reached out to hug me, then pushed me aside at the last second to hug my brother. "Not you, Eli. No one's ever gonna love you," he'd tell me as he pushed me aside. It sounds petty out of context, but I feel like it was a stab in the heart. It was an even bigger stab in the heart as his family laughed at me for thinking it had been meant for me. After this, his family wished that I was dead, and at 13 I tried to hang myself. I took their words to heart. Obviously, I'm still here, so it didn't work. All I ended up doing was bashing my head into the carpet of the apartment we were living in at the time. Following all of this, I had joined the Palm Springs Writers Guild at age 12 and had also joined the Desert Screenwriters Guild shortly after I turned 14. I had spent a lot of my time in my local library reading in order to cope with the trauma sustained during my childhood. High school would start, and being Asian in a predominantly Hispanic school, I found myself a victim of racism. I was hassled for having slanted eyes, but I learned to deal with it. I made friends and did my best to get by. It was difficult. However, the constant bullying and harassment for being Asian, mixed in with ADHD, stress from home and school, alongside a system that merely pretended to care about their students, something was going to break down. The thing that just happened to break was me. Near the end of the school year, I had an emotional breakdown. I ended up getting into a fight with one of the idiots who had been constantly harassing me. I said some things that I honestly regret, and if I had known that it would have led to the following, I would have just stayed home or ditched school altogether. I was a police explorer at the time, and because of this, my instructor essentially had all of my personal contact information. That night, I got a call from the instructor, and the first thing he asked was, "Are you going to shoot up your local high school?" I had an anxiety attack. My chest sank. It almost felt like my heart condition was coming back, like the world had just compressed and slowly crushed me. I passed the phone to my mom. I was scared shitless, and it kept me awake most of the night crying. I could hear my mom in the other room explaining to my instructor that there was a paper trail related to my emotional breakdown. I don't remember sleeping that night, but the next day I was instructed to go into my school's main office first thing that morning. My instructor wasn't there. A different officer was there that day. I knew her as she sometimes helped with the Explorer program. She explained to my mom and I that my room was to be searched. Apparently, I had tripped the kids with guns protocol and was now red flagged as a potential school shooter. But I wasn't stupid. I knew my Fourth Amendment rights, and I knew that I was entitled to those. I explained to my mom that the cops would be looking for a reason to classify me as a potential threat, either through my writing, the games I played, or the fact that I enjoyed reading about World War II and history in general. Despite my explanations, she told me that she was going to let the police come into the house. When I asked her why, her response was, "Because we have nothing to hide." I ended up being suspended, and the cops showed up to the house. I begged my mom not to let the cops in. As they came to the door, I still remember the words I let out. "Last chance. Do not let them in." She let them in and sealed my fate. 2 officers entered my home, and I was immediately told to sit on the couch. As they came in, all I could think of were the Army officers' words. "You're either going to end up a heroin addict or getting shot by the cops." That thought process continued going through my 14-year-old head, and I was scared because, as stupid as it sounded, I was afraid of getting shot. The 2 officers had the same look on their faces, the same one my dad had right before he would come up with an excuse to beat me, the "I'm gonna get you one way or another" look of determination. It's something that you don't forget, and it sticks with you. They tried to question me, but I didn't answer, so my mom tried to get me to answer their questions. The officers asked me whether I owned a gun. When I refused to answer, my mom explained that she doesn't like guns, and she doesn't own one. Behind the officer questioning me, I watched the other officer come in and knock over my lamp. When I stood up and pointed that out, the other officer yelled at me to sit back down on the couch. He then went into another line of questioning, asking me, What's in your room that's got you so nervous?" Meanwhile, the other officer tore apart my room. The officer that was searching my room finally came back with stacks of papers in his hand. I immediately noticed them as my manuscripts from my time in the writing guilds. He threw them in front of me and asked, "What's this? Is this your kill list?" The title of the first sheet read, "Character Sheet." "Donovan Paulson, Jacqueline Conway, are you out to kill these people?" he asked me. He pulled out another stack of paper which had a bunch of research about World War II and modern infantry weapons meant to supplement my work and make my stories more realistic. I'd spent a lot of time reading about the Second World War and the global war on terror in order to make the best stories I could for a 14-year-old. He pulled out those notes and asked, "Why do you have so many notes on things like guns and explosives? You know normal kids don't look into that, right?" I retorted with, "Tell that to everyone playing Call of Duty." "You being a smartass with me?" he asked. "You tell me," I said, annoyed. He gave me a scornful look. "You've got an attitude problem." I didn't answer at this point. I was too angry, scared, and dejected to do so. My mom interjected, and I told him that I was an active member of the Desert Screenwriters Group in the Palm Springs Writers Guild. They didn't stop there. They wanted to grill me on my choice of games and reading. In particular, they weren't very thrilled when they had found the U.S. Army field manuals and books related to World War II infantry tactics in my room. They tried to accuse me of being this dangerous kid, a threat to others, and that locking me up was probably for the best. They realized that none of these were grounds for arrest, so they left, and I breathed a sigh of relief, happy that they hadn't taken my computer and looked through my browser history full of firearms and text files related to writing out my frustrations and subsequent memories related to abuse. You'd think that this is where the nightmare ends. Everyone goes home and realizes I'm not actually dangerous and that I'm not out to hurt people, of course. Wrong. Dead fucking wrong, in fact. I had a school disciplinary hearing the next day to deem whether I was sane enough, according to the vice principal that had flagged me, and included the presence of a district disciplinary in charge of this sort of thing. The build-up to the disciplinary meeting was tense. I felt anxious, and my mom had to coach me and tell me not to be honest about my answers. I was a fearful mess leading up to all of this. I'd go in resigning myself to whatever happened next, and it would all take place in front of the vice principal of my high school and the district disciplinarian. In my mind, I'd really just given up. If I was going to lie, it was because it was something that needed to be done. What were they going to do? Arrest me for it? We took seats at a round table. They summarized what I had done, why the disciplinary hearing was necessary, and that I had been red flagged under the Kids with Guns protocol, a red flag system that the school district enacted to stop potential school shooters. Their words, not mine. I felt nothing short of shame come over me as I was thinking about the type of person I was. Was I crazy? Was I a bad person? Did I deserve the title of potential school shooter? It disturbed me, the writer, the guy who was struggling not just in school, but who was also trying to attend therapy and recover from the things his dad and other adults had done to them. "So what kind of games do you play?" asked my vice principal. I thought over my responses, realizing that they wanted me to slip up and answer with the truth. Like every other kid my age in 2014, I enjoyed playing action games like Call of Duty, Uncharted, and The Last of Us. Of course, I didn't play these games because I liked killing. I played them because I genuinely enjoyed their stories. I enjoyed being Nathan Drake, Joel, or playing as a soldier on the front lines of the Second World War. I liked feeling their struggles in these worlds. It was an escape from the constant nightmares in reality, and the case of Uncharted made me want to travel the world. I gave half the truth. I told them I'd played tabletop and role-playing games like Fallout or Warhammer 40K tabletop, and that I had friends I played these games with. "So you like getting away from the real world? Is the real world too hard for you to handle?" asked the vice principal. I didn't answer. I realized in that moment that no matter what I said, they were going to find a way to use my words against me. If I told them my dad had been a cunt to me growing up, they'd pin it against me. It was a catch-22, and they were using what I was saying against me in order to prove that I was some kind of deranged killer. I was genuinely disgusted by this line of questioning at this point after having been through everything else. "So, how many friends do you have?" asked the disciplinarian. I didn't have to lie about this question, though I had to give up the names of my friends who would end up being interviewed. "What do you do in your free time?" asked the vice principal. "I spend a lot of time in the library," I answered. "Oh, so you're alone and introverted, I see," he said and wrote down. My eyes widened, realizing I'd slipped. After this, they noted the lies I had told them and revealed that the cops had taken notes on what they found in my room and passed it on to the school. They tried to pin me as a compulsive liar for everything I'd told them about. At this point, my mom and I started to pull out the various instances of bullying that were in writing and started all of this. We pointed out that they had known about all of this in advance and had done nothing. They had done nothing for us in the face of all of this. In the face of their zero-tolerance policy, their accusations of me being a potential school shooter and being a threat to others flew in the face of direct evidence in their own wrongdoing. The disciplinarian gave the vice principal a look of confusion. He glanced at the paper trail in front of him, then back over at the vice principal. He massaged his eyes and told the vice principal to step out. The disciplinarian realized what had happened and explained to me that I was only going to be expelled from this school and that I would have to go to a new school closer to where I lived. The transfer went through, and honestly, I wish it had ended there, but it didn't. I had nightmares where I'd be dragged away from the cops and watch as my mom begged them not to take me away. I had to get a potentially cancerous cyst taken out of my arm a few months later, and during surgery I dreamed I was being charged with being a domestic terrorist. The students at the new school I ended up going to knew me as the future school shooter kid. It wasn't made much better that a good friend of mine was dead, and I suppressed the real emotions I had in fear that the police would use this as a precursor to claim that I was mentally unsound. They destroyed my grieving process. I had no outlet outside of the friends I had online, which I'm thankful for to this day. Other than that, I rolled with the punches, getting into a bit of trouble as people tried picking fights with me for the same reasons I'd been kicked from the other school. A year later, I would transfer into an independent studies program and do surprisingly well. It was a minor adjustment period, one where I realized I had a week to do a large amount of work but had the freedom to do just about anything else. I would work my first job during all of this and did well at it. After that, I went to college to be an auto mechanic and worked a job as a technician at a car dealership. While I enjoyed the course and the people I went to class with, work was difficult, as everyone there had gone to school with me when I was 14, citing me as the guy most likely to shoot up work. Between this and people outside class that gave me trouble for being the guy most likely to shoot up school or work, I was pretty much done with it all. The turning point for me was leaving the gun store with my first gun and hearing behind me, "Be careful, don't shoot up any schools with that thing." That was the point I decided I had to put my plan of moving out of California into action. I was tired of the abuse, the bullying, and the harassment. I wanted to put the aftermath of my investigation behind me. I wanted to stop having to look over my shoulder, and I wanted to stop feeling like I had to care about what others thought of me in fear that if they didn't, the cops would come after me. I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and I made a new life for myself, but the memories of the past still haunt me to this day. To deal with them and make a change for the better that wasn't drinking myself to death like I had done for the first 3 years of living alone, I decided to take part in pro-Second Amendment activism. When I got into the activism community, I genuinely thought many of these points and my experiences would show the dangers of these laws. Despite this, people who should know better, like Dave Grossman, continue to push the narrative over the disproven correlation between games and school shootings. I did my best to make my points, but the community ended up rearing its ugly head, and the toxicity from it drove me away. I ended up leaving because of the amount of hyper-partisan nonsense that drove me up a wall, especially when these red flag laws weren't only supported by Democrats but also by Republicans. To state the obvious, being red flagged by my school district fucked me up. The people I was supposed to trust went through my life with a fine-toothed comb and made me into a mess of a person extremely careful around others. I would find out the hard way that I was on my own, and this gave me an understanding that law enforcement's job was to find criminals even where there may be none. Examples like Rampart Division in Los Angeles and Ruby Ridge, alongside my own incident, showed me I needed to be wary around law enforcement and careful of who to trust. To close, I'm sharing my story in hopes that it never happens again, and my only wish is for what happened to me to never happen to anyone else. Thank you.